Welcome to the Restaurant Boiler Room, Season 6, Episode 4. I'm your host, Rick Ormsby, Managing Director at Unbridled Capital. Today in the Boiler Room, I'll be giving some insight on current restaurant news, including M&A deal flow, several high-flying brands, commentary on our sluggish consumer spending, and a few recent transactions. The Restaurant Boiler Room is a one-stop shop for multi-million-dollar merger and acquisition activity and financial complexities affecting the franchise industry. We talk money, deals, valuations, and risk, delivered to the front door of franchisees, private equity firms, family offices, large investors, and franchisors on a monthly basis. Feel free to find our content at Unbridled Capital's website at www.unbridledcapital.com. Now, let's enter the boiler room. Well, hey, everybody, I'm talking to you here on, I think, maybe June the 11th. You'll probably start hearing this of 2024, maybe in a week or so from now. And happy summer to everybody. It seems like in the Ormsby family, it's been a pretty crazy run to the summertime. But living down here at the Panhandle of Florida, the summertime ends up being a cool time of year, right? Not really cool, literally speaking, but it's a great time of the year to be out in the water and see everyone coming down for their summer vacations. And, I did notice so far this summer that it seems like the crowds down here for the first time in a long time are actually a little less thick than what they have been. And I've talked to some local friends of mine and business owners, and they seem to notice the same thing. Maybe it has to do a little bit with sluggish consumer spending. I don't know if you saw this article, but as we, a couple of weeks ago, there's an interesting article. It showed up on several different news sources, but it says basically they all say the same thing, that almost 80% of Americans now consider fast food a luxury item due to the high prices caused by inflation. This was just a new survey of 2,000 people through LendingTree. And the survey also found that although 3 in 4 Americans typically have fast food once a week, 62% say they're dining out less due to recently rising prices. And increasing costs across the border are causing people not to come as frequently. And I guess I'm noticing it here on the beach and vacations as well. That's just the Rick Ormsby eyeball test and talking to a couple local business owners too. So that's kind of the economy and environment that we find ourselves in. It's really an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, the headline is the stock market's doing well. We're having, we just had a job report come out, and although unemployment kind of ticked up a little bit to 4%. A lot fewer a lot more jobs created in the last measurable than what we expected. Just kind of conflicting information. Stock market has been performing fairly well this year. Our budgetary woes as a country continue to be eye-popping. It's an election year. You see, kind of what feels to be a pullback of the customer, but it's just kind of unclear. And I think this is going through the Fed as they think about whether to raise interest rates or delay raising interest rates. Obviously, that's one of the big 3 or 4 levers in the M&A business that help or hinder the speed, pace, and amount of deal flow that a firm like Unbridled Capital will see. I mean, I think you have to have like the fundamentals of your industry in place. We always do more work and better work when our clients are doing well in their businesses. So you kind of want to have a really strong macroeconomic environment going on, as one key segment or leg of the stool in the M&A cycle. Do we have that right now? Kind of sort of meh, you know what I mean? Then the brands or the segment of the industry that you're working on as an M&A advisor is important too, right? So if you're in a really go-go time macroeconomically, but your sector is struggling, that's not going to be good. That's probably why a lot of these large firms in New York and elsewhere have generalist investment banking practices, so they can hop nimbly between segments that either become hot or don't become hot, depending on how they're doing in the economy. In our segment of franchising, I would say largely speaking, we are kind of sort of in a gronk it out fight, twist and pull and shove for 1 to 2% sales growth and flat transactions, or maybe -1 or -2% transactions on a year-over-year basis. And there are winners and losers within that spectrum. But I think the overall headline is that sales and transactions are kind of drifting lower this year versus what you would find in a typical non-adjusted, non-COVID, non-post-COVID sort of year in our industry, especially since we're seeing so much competition with new stores that are opening up and some of these new brands that are in many cases quite exciting. Another item of that stool is clearly the interest rate environment, and it does not appear that we're going to have meaningful, interest rate changes over the next 6 to 12 months. Really, I think I may have said it on another podcast if you've heard it, but I'll say it again: that what we noticed when the Fed started raising rates was that bankers and lenders and a lot of the risk folks started tightening up their lending portfolios and becoming more conservative, with a delayed effect of 6 to 9 months, if that makes sense. And and that's kind of the way a banker typically thinks anyway, isn't it? They typically look at least 1 quarter in arrears. So they're not really real time as much as maybe an advisor like me would be, right? Or our company would be. So that might explain the lag. And it probably will also explain what I'm guessing will be a lag when interest rates finally do start coming down and start coming down in a meaningful way. I have clients all the time that say, hey, we're hearing some decent interest rate news in Europe, and that may mean that they're going to cut one round of rates earlier than expected this year. And won't that have a meaningful change on the M&A market? And I say to them, no, it won't. It won't. Will have no effect. As a matter of fact, this is going to be, kind of a longer term play out. And again, remember, if I'm right about it, that it may take, 6 to 9 to 12 months after the interest rate decreases stop in order to have meaningful change at the banking level. And at the banking level, we continue to see, kind of a really tepid market, right? I mean, people, I talked to quite a few lenders. I was just at the Wendy's franchise forum, so it was a Wendy's convention in Minneapolis, and saw a bunch of the usual suspect lenders, and most of them don't have a lot of deal flow. And many of them are not doing many deals. They're seeing deals. Some of them are doing deals, but I think what I've seen so far this year is and I thought it would happen towards the back half of this year after seeing what I thought was really an unexpected beginning into 2024 with the lack of deal flow. And then I thought to myself, in the second half of the year, what we're likely to see is more deal flow in the market. And I think that's what's coming and what's out there now. But a lot of it is unqualified or overpriced or not realistic sellers, or maybe, frankly, desperate advisors and third parties that haven't been paid on anything in a while, who are looking to do more work and taking things that they normally wouldn't take. And so my guess is in the next 6 months, that's largely the type of deal flow that you're going to see. And when you do see that deal flow, my guess is that less than a third of it is actually going to close. So that's one comment. I mean, our model in Unbridled Capital is not that way, though, right? We keep a 90% or try to keep a 90% success rate of closing the assignments that we're engaged in. And that would necessitate that we're not going to take a flyer on the type of businesses we think are a little overpriced, or we're not sure if the market will agree to it, or if we think a seller is going to be a little bit unreasonable, or it can't get financed properly. All those things would be reasons we would probably back away from an assignment. And also, if we find that a client wants, 10% more than what we think it's worth, we're typically going to say no. But I think in this type of an environment, you're going to find a lot of advisors doing the opposite, which is taking things and just seeing if they stick on the wall when you throw it at the wall. So be careful of that. I don't want to say there's junk deal flow out there, but there is a lot of speculative deal flow that probably will not close. We are seeing an uptick in difficult assignments, ones that are either pressured by the franchisor or by the lender. I'm starting to get those calls now. We are very selective personally on those types of assignments. They're difficult assignments. And a lot of parties have to agree, and bankruptcy is a possibility. So you have to be careful about those types of assignments. But I know they're out there. So if you're that type of buyer, then keep your ear to the grindstone here, and maybe there'll be some activity here for you, continued activity. So one of the themes so far in 2024 for me is kind of the lack of strong businesses that are for sale. And as an aside, when there are strong businesses for sale, guess what happens? It's just like if you're the only guy owning a beautiful property on the water in Florida and you put your house up for sale, it's going to have a ton of interest, right? Just because the inventory is not there like it used to be. So, but generally, the big message here is that private equity has largely kind of drifted away from looking at these deals right now. And I think I've said it before, it's because a couple of reasons. One is their multiple of invested capital calculation that they're interested in, kind of makes them need to borrow money at low interest rates and also build new units at low cost. And those two things are difficult to do right now. I mean, the cost of construction is still abnormally high. And so, and interest rates, as we know, have been elevated for a time. And so those two switches are not switched on for the private equity community. And it means that they're in many cases much more selective, not as interested in looking at our segment. And I think some little known fact is that we've had the first wave of private equity groups. Some of them have had a little bit of struggle selling the assets that they bought 6 and 7 years ago. And it doesn't take long in this industry for that to blow through, some of the PE offices in some of these big cities, and they hear that some of their colleagues and other firms are having trouble selling the assets and making money off of the, and making a decent return off of the investments that they made. And I think once that gets out there a little bit, it tends to have a multiplying effect. It's amazing. I talk to all kinds of these private equity and family office groups, and it's interesting, even in different cities and different focuses, that they focus on, still they know each other, and almost all of them know each other fairly well. It's a very tight community, tighter than you might realize, but that's out there. A couple of items just to note in the news. It looks like, California continues to show some negative news with the impact of the increased interest rate. The labor rate there that's now in the low to mid 20s in terms of dollars per hour. I just saw some note that close to 50 Rubio's, I believe it was, restaurants just closed there, and they were citing California wage law as being one of the reasons why. And so unfortunately for the Californians, many of whom are friends of mine, I would say that this is for operators, franchisees in that state. I know you're struggling right now and you're battling those high wage rates. The good news is that once you figure this out and you can price your way and manage your way into a post minimum wage explosion profitability level, I think you will take a lot of the uncertainty, and there's always uncertainty in California, but you'll take a lot of the uncertainty out of the future operating profit woes of your business. So maybe what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and I hope that a lot of the operators and franchisees there can figure it out. I know you will be able to, but expect several thousand closings of restaurants in California over the next couple of years, I would think. And I would think it's just now starting to happen. There was a recent bankruptcy with Red Lobster. Interesting. I remember Red Lobster growing up, don't you? With those cheddar biscuits that are to die for. And I grew up in Kentucky, in the middle of the country. That was kind of our only window into seafood, unless I wanted to get a fried fish sandwich, at Long John Silver's or maybe Captain D's. So that bankruptcy was kind of sad to hear, and I know a lot of the locations are going to close down. Sale leasebacks were a factor. All-you-can-eat shrimp gone awry was a factor. Not being able to secure enough supply was a factor. COVID was certainly a factor. Casual dining has been out of favor now for quite a while, and that I wouldn't say is exacerbating. COVID made it really bad, and those types of establishments have come back a little bit. But I just think in general, casual dining is a tough space to be in, and it's not really changing. If you look at the average casual dining business, I would say you're going to find, and this is just one man's eyeball test, that the patrons there are typically older. And my generation, I'm almost 50, so Gen X generation and then kind of the millennials don't really eat at sit-down casual dining establishments as much. And so it's a business model change that is going to affect this industry and has for the last several years. I'm frankly quite surprised that some of these big concepts have weathered the storm as well as they have. Kevin Hochman's the president over at Chili's, and shout out to Kevin. I think he listens to this podcast. He's a friend of mine, and he used to be the KFC president. And we did a podcast with them maybe 2 years ago, and it was a really good one. So listen to it if you go back and dig backwards, I think, and maybe into season 3 or season 4. But I know they're doing okay, and I hope they do well. We did just see some pretty crazy news from the Cracker Barrel brand. And these numbers aren't exactly right, but I think in the last quarter, they had something like negative 16% sales, and then like big transaction declines. I mean, that may not be exactly right. I'm just working from memory here, but they came out publicly and said that they have to change and they have to do things better and they have to, change their menu and they have to, upgrade the restaurants and do all these things. And I'm afraid that good money will chase bad too much and too long in some of these casual diners where they may upgrade these expensive assets and spend a lot of money just to recoup maybe half of the lost sales that they had. And that won't ultimately be a good return on investment. I hope Cracker Barrel can pull it out and figure it out, though, as another casual diner, because they're kind of like a stalwart of the American psyche, right, of Americana, don't you think? But when was the last time that you ate at a Cracker Barrel? Saw recently that Starbucks is losing some market share with some tepid sales and transactions, and so they're kind of doubling down on figuring out how to fix that. They're largely a franchisor and licensee model, so they don't really have franchisees in the way that Unbridled would work and represent franchisees. We don't do any business with the Starbucks brand. But what I have noticed, and I think you probably have too in your hometown, is a proliferation of these new coffee concepts. I mean, we have a Scooters in our neighborhood. I think and our daughter down in Texas loves Dutch Brothers, and Seven Brew is really kicking butt and really growing units. I mean, that brand may have a couple thousand units before we just wake up one day in a couple of years. So there's just been an entrance of big competitors into the space where Starbucks really had this almost monopoly for a long amount of time. So it's interesting to see how they'll react and respond to some of the market share and sales and transactions woes that they've experienced recently. I mean, it may not be a growth stock right now anymore, and it was always kind of forever thought that way in our industry for the last 20 years. I kind of like the Cava brand. What do you guys think? Have you been to Cava? Have you seen? We have one in Pensacola now, and so I go occasionally, and I'm really impressed with the quality of their food. Kind of reminds me of a Chipotle in a way. I don't know, in kind of some sort of crazy way. And I know how the young folks like Chipotle, and every time I go into Cava, it is loaded with young people, particularly young ladies, but all kinds of young people. It must be a really popular brand with Gen Z and with the millennials, probably with other age groups too. But keep an eye on the Cava brand and watch it grow a little bit. And it's one of a couple of handfuls of these new concepts that seem to be gaining quite a big amount of traction over the last several years and somewhat quietly. Chipotle, of course, is another one that just continues to do awesome. And then one of the darlings and maybe more of the traditional fast food space, although I don't know that I'd consider this brand a fast food brand, is Wingstop. And they're doing some incredible things. They've got sales growth year over year that's like 30 to 35%. Oh my goodness. Not only that, but the cost of wings has not just kind of eased, but it's dropped substantially. So these higher prices that the Wingstop franchisees are able to command are also being married up with really low food costs. So the profitability in these units right now is incredible. And I don't know, in my 20 plus years in this business, that I have seen a brand take off anywhere near the way that Wingstop has over the last 2 years. I mean, it's shocking. And you start hearing about some other wing concepts starting to try to come online in the vein of like, hey, Wingstop is doing so well, let's give it a go and try to do the same thing. Kind of like the Starbucks is doing so well, let's give it a go and try to offer something similar. So what is it? Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. But Wingstop is just doing great, and just keep keep watching them and see if this kind of like winning streak can continue, right? I just don't know if it will. At Unbridled, we've had a couple of recent closings since the last time I talked with you. We did sell a bunch of Little Caesars restaurants in the Midwest. That was an interesting brand, a great brand, and had a fair amount of interest in it. We sold a 13-unit European wax center business in Texas and Florida. That was an interesting deal. We're starting to branch out a little bit outside of restaurant franchising into some other non-restaurant brands. I think this will be for our company a bigger part of what we do going forward. And the EWC, European Wax Center, EWC brand was one that I, really interesting to learn more about them. Their model doesn't work like a restaurant where you just pop the location open, turn on the lights, and then all of a sudden, bam, you have a ton of traffic and a ton of sales. And then you hope that you can keep maybe 30% of your opening day sales at steady state after about 4 months or 5 months. So that's the way it works in kind of a typical fast food kind of environment, not so much like a Wingstop, which is heavy digital and dine-in and carry-out, but in a traditional drive-through based restaurant model, you would have, turn on the lights, your first day open, you do huge sales, and then sales kind of drift a little bit over time, and you hope to achieve 30%, let's just say, of your opening day sales. But in something like a European Wax Center, which is a model that, it takes up to several years to build your revenue up to where your steady state revenue will be, since you're it's not a subscription model, but you have kind of like regular people coming back over time, and the bill and the revenue and the transactions build over time instead of peak and then fall. And then you might be thinking, if you are one of these young family office private equity guys or girls listen to this message, you're like, well, that would be interesting to marry the two together, right? To marry a franchise restaurant concept investment with one like a European Wax Center or something like it that actually builds over time and has a low development cost and has a different type of build and isn't a drive-through business. They may kind of complement one another, lower risk and increase diversification. And there was a thread in our industry of people looking to do that maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I started mentioning it. I was like, why don't we see people doing that in their investments more frequently? There's only a handful of people that might own a restaurant company, a wellness company, and then, I don't know, maybe a tax, planning franchise, and kind of have them in different areas of the country potentially, or in the same area where you could kind of keep a cone of operations, but have diversification across different types of segments within franchising. And you don't see it a lot. And now I've kind of learned why a little bit. It's difficult to manage these disparate franchise systems that don't have, similar amounts of management and support. And there are different franchisees completely that are in like restaurants versus non-restaurants. There's a big difference in terms of the way they operate and the way they think. Still think it's an opportunity. One of the things I did kind of, realize too was I tried to apply my experience of seeing tons and tons of liquidity and deal flow and plenty of buyers for these franchise restaurant businesses. And so I thought that you would find that just as much so in the non-restaurant space, especially if you got larger size businesses like 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 unit non-restaurant franchise businesses that we're either selling or helping to recapitalize. And what I have found is that the liquidity, the interest in those types of investments is slightly less than restaurants, which would be decidedly normal, right? Because a restaurant concept like whatever, KFC, Taco Bell, whatever it is, Burger King has been around a long time, in many cases 60 or 70 years, where some of these non-restaurant brand concepts have only been around 10 to 15 to 20. The last kind of deal that we've closed recently was a Wendy's transaction. I'll read you a little bit of the press release for it. It was 65 Wendy's in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. And we provided sell-side advisory to Primary Aim, led by brothers Ben, Tim, and Steve Thompson 2000 on the sale of 65 Wendy's. The restaurants were acquired by Delight Restaurant Group, led by brothers and existing franchisees Rich and Andrew Krumholtz, who are also Taco Bell franchisees. And now they will have collectively, the Krumholtz family with Delight Restaurant Group will have somewhere around, I think, 226 Wendy's and Taco Bells. And the Thompson family, which are really just awesome guys, and their story is really awesome. They started with one restaurant in 2001. The middle brother, Tim, was a one restaurant franchisee, and they then built a couple, bought a couple of more, and then they bought a big acquisition and went from like 2 or 3 stores up to 30 stores, bang, and they became like big franchisees. And they continued to grow from there, both through acquisitions and building. Been doing it for over 20 years. They now have sold at a great price. There was a lot of interest in it. Wendy's is a great brand. It's a steady brand. It's a hit a double, hit a single up the middle type of a brand, a stable, good franchisees, great Midwestern kind of grit behind Dave Thomas, who founded it. And you can feel it in that franchise system if you get to know the franchisees. But the Thompsons will stay in. They're going to continue to be smaller franchisees in the Columbus area, close to where the brand was started. And the Krumholtzes are now building a big, awesome monster business in this franchise space. And we wish both parties just this big old congratulations and wish them the best. And we're thankful to be a part of it and to be a part of such a successful business and a successful sale and honestly, a really tough time for strong M&A in 2024. One of the things I'll note is we gave a $15,000 donation to the Dave Thomas Foundation. Now, Dave Thomas, at the condition of closing this, and maybe I've said it before, but our company tries because I feel like we are to be a blessing because we have been blessed. It actually it's kind of from the Old Testament of the Bible, and in Genesis chapter 12, when God said, "I'll make you a blessing to all nations," and so that's kind of what we live by at Unbridled. And when we close deals, we typically try to give some money back in the form of a thank you to the brand or to some cause that affects the franchisees or the clients that we represent. In this particular case, Rich Krumholtz and several members of the Thompson family were active in the Dave Thomas Foundation. Dave was adopted. And the Dave Thomas Foundation, I've just come to learn a little bit about it, and they do some really, really cool work. So their goal is to take kind of the older age foster children that have been bouncing from foster home to foster home and institution to institution. Most of them are teenage years, right, that don't have as many people wanting to adopt them, and to link them up with case officers and with support to find permanent homes for them and to try to save the lives of these kids one child at a time. And I got to tell you, I've seen a lot of brand foundations and a lot of great causes. Many of the brands support kind of the mental health and the physical needs of some of the employees that work in the brands, right? And they have tragedies and things that happen to them. And these are brands with thousands and thousands and thousands of employees. And, those employees, if they have a hard time, a lot of the foundations exist to support them and their families in times of need. And those are worthy things to do. But I've rarely seen an effort more worthy than, in the franchise business with these foundations than the Dave Thomas Foundation. They seem to do some really good, really thoughtful, and really effective work. And I would, obviously encourage you to check them out. Check them out. Okay, what else can we talk about today? A couple of quick comments to close. I get a fair amount of young folks who reach out to me these days, and I love it, right? Like in my hometown, I do a Bible study for high school boys, and my wife and I pour a lot into the high school community here. Of course, our son's a high schooler, but we believe in the future of these young men and women in these communities, and we know, as you all do, that without the next generation stepping up and doing big things, we're only a generation away from tons of negative change in our world, right? And so that's kind of a ministry for us. And I'm here to tell you too that what you see and what you read about how negative the world is, I am actually quite positive, uplifted, and optimistic about the future of these youth. There are some sharp, motivated, and socially conscious young men and women who want to make a difference in this world. And so that's my encouragement to you as you hear this, that it may not be as dark and grim as you think or have read or have seen on TV. That's number one. Number two, we also support, we do some mentoring, or I do, with the University of West Florida, which is just kind of our local university in Pensacola. It's a good little university, but they've got a business school over there, and I try to get involved with some of the young kids who are in the business school to kind of give them direction and things. And so I get a lot of these questions, and I get a lot of people asking for internships and things like that. And I can't respond to everybody. If you're listening to this, I'm sorry if I haven't been able to respond to you. But I get this question a lot, like, where did I get my interest in public speaking, from a lot of people who listen to the podcast here. And it's interesting, isn't it? I attribute it a lot to maybe in the late 2000s. Since you all have asked this question, I'll respond to it, right? So I hope I haven't bored you here with this answer, but in the mid 2000s, I started, kind of doing, teaching a Bible study at our church, and I would stand up, for 45 minutes and teach via the Socratic method. We would just kind of read a scripture verse, and then we would go through talking about how it applied to your lives, and I would ask a series of questions on how to get to the right answer. And that kind of was difficult to do because I was around a couple hundred really smart, intelligent people, many of whom had been studying God's Word for a long time. And guess what ended up happening? I had to field lots and lots of questions that I couldn't answer and not get flustered by it. And so that discipline of doing that week in and week out for many years is kind of what enabled me, I think, to be able to speak in public and speak in front of clients. And maybe there's a lesson as you hear that. I don't know what the lesson would be. Maybe it's civic engagement or community service. And certainly I give, and I try to give my time and our family's time in ways that will bless others. But isn't it true, and it is true, that when you aim, and if you're like really trying to bless other people, that really the indirect benefit is that you get blessed in return. And so I think the ability to speak and the love of speaking and communicating came from that. Someone once also commonly asked me, like, where did I get the gumption to be a business owner and start a business, right, and do what I do? So I'll answer that one too. I grew up in a family of carpetbagging entrepreneurs. And so, most of my family never worked for a big company. And if they did, they only worked as a contractor for a short amount of time. In the little town in Kentucky that we grew up, I had one side of my family was coal miners. The other side of my family worked in, auto manufacturing business. And my grandfather on that side ended up owning a small parts manufacturing company. I had a other grandfather who, owned a coal mine and then brokered coal later in his life. And then my dad and mom were the first ones in my family, to kind of fully go through education and really, but both of them end up in entrepreneurship too. And when I was a young boy, about the age of 10 or 11, my mom would write cookbooks and she would just sell them. And she would go to some of these kind of conventions that I now go to with some of these franchisees and financial backed companies and things where you get to, these conventions. And I would go as a 10 and 11-year-old boy, and my mom would like cook some sort of recipe, cut it up into like 20 different parts. She would leave me at the booth and say, Ricky, because I was Ricky at the time as a young boy, she would say, Ricky, hand these out and tell people about our cookbooks. And she'd leave me. And I'm like 10 or 11 years old, right? So what do you think about that, man? Talk about trial by fire, right? So I learned how to approach and communicate with adults in a convention style format with no one telling me what to do at an early age. And I think I may have said this on one of the podcasts previously, so pardon me if I'm repeating myself, but I kind of quickly found out that could have, even before I was a teenager, figure out who the decision maker was and who was the person who would buy 50 cookbooks for their gift shop instead of someone who would take up all your time just to talk with you for 20 minutes and buy one cookbook. And it became kind of a skill that I developed at a young age and continue to do, I guess, to this day some. So practice makes perfect. I thought I would just share that with you. You all have asked, and I would encourage you to continue at it. For any young people who are listening to this podcast, again, know that the investment banking world right now is not really in much of a hiring mode. As a matter of fact, there are quite a few. We aren't. Unbridled isn't losing any of our people or firing or laying people off, but a lot of the larger organizations are. And I think that if we continue to see somewhat slow deal flow for the next 6 to 12 months, it's going to stay that way. So you may have to pivot into another type of area and park yourself there for a couple of years and wait for an M&A turnaround. I mean, the presidential election may bring some change and pace to the M&A, and really it could do it no matter who wins. You know what I mean? If Trump gets in, then maybe the business climate improves, right? I don't know that Biden has done much for our economy in a positive way, but if Biden is reelected, I know there's going to be a fear that taxes are going to go up, and it's going to probably spur some short-term selling of companies to avoid that. Either way, you may see an uptick after the election when there's more certainty of what the near-term future may lie. So that's all I got for today. Thank you guys. And as always, lastly, I guess before I sign off here, I would say we have, maybe 9 or 10 active assignments. We've taken a couple of new ones in the last, 30 days, although we have turned down almost 15 assignments in the last couple of months because of valuations that were out of line, or people that just didn't seem to be ready to sell, or the market conditions weren't right for the particular business. Even so, we've taken a couple of new assignments recently. I'm hopeful that that'll lead to a little bit more deal flow this fall. The summertime is typically a time when deal flow kind of slows down. Just for whatever reason, people are appreciating their summers, or they're collecting summer sales with high seasonality in most locations, but it's not typically a time when folks are jumping into the market to sell something. That usually kind of starts happening again in the fall, and then really starts cranking up towards the November, December timeframe. And then it certainly bleeds into the early part of the year, January, February, and people get their year-end P&Ls. But let's just see how it goes. We'll continue to monitor it, and if we can help you at Unbridled Capital, you know how to reach us, unbridledcapital.com, and we're here for you anytime. Thank you so much. Enjoy your summer and get some sun. Take care. Thanks so much for entering the Boiler Room today. You can find our podcasts on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Spotify. If you like these podcasts, please listen, rate, and review. I also encourage you to visit our website at www.unbridledcapital.com for the best franchise M&A and financial resources in the industry. Our website includes webinars, podcasts, videos, white papers, and a list of our past M&A transactions. Please note that neither Rick Ormsby nor Unbridled Capital Advisors LLC give legal, financial, or tax advice. These podcasts represent opinions that have been prepared for informational purposes only. We expressly disclaim any and all liabilities that may be based on such information, errors therein, or omissions therefrom.